Good afternoon. I'm Bill Shemidas, Dean of the Nicholas School of the Environment, and I welcome you to the Nicholas School's 2011 Environment and Society Lecture Series. Today we are greatly honored to have as our distinguished lecturer the Environmental Protection Agency's Administrator, Lisa Jackson. We are honored to have a great audience with us today here in Reynolds Theater. We also are expecting about 300 virtual attendees as we are web streaming this event. I also should mention that we have some distinguished guests in the audience, including Gwen Keyes-Fleming, who is the Region 4 Director. Hi, Gwen. The Environment and Society Lecture Series was born of a recognition that environmental change, environmental degradation is about much more than the environment. There are ripples that spread throughout the social fabric of our society. In October of this year, for example, consider Thailand was hit with a devastating flood, destroying thousands of homes, putting tens of thousands of people out of work, and closing down some 14,000 factories. An environmental disaster, to be sure, especially for the Thais, but there were ripples. Because of those floods and the factory closings, computer companies around the globe are now scrambling to find hard drives to put in their computers. Consider, this fall, for reasons unknown, oak trees in the northeast United States are having one of the worst acorn crops in recent history. Who cares about acorns? Well, there are ripples. The dearth of acorns will lead to a cascade throughout the northeastern ecosystems. We're expecting to see a cratering in the populations of field mice. And a cratering of the population of field mice is leading scientists to predict that 2012 will be the worst year ever for Lyme disease. Acorn ripples, human health effects. Consider, decades of mismanagement of the Mississippi River and the Delta, coupled with unrestrained exploration of resources by extractive industries, are leading to the rapid loss of very valuable wetlands in the Gulf. An environmental disaster, perhaps one of the worst of our nation, but an environmental disaster with ripples that threaten profound American cultural and economic legacies. Century-old Native American communities of the Louisiana Bayou are sinking into the sea, and the livelihoods of the Gulf fishing communities are being undermined. The myth that the environment is an issue for Greens and largely irrelevant or in competition with the economic concerns is just that, a myth. Understanding how environmental events ripple through society and how human events ripple through the environment, and how those ripples ripple through each other, if you will, is the key to understanding how our world works and hopefully how we can make it a better world. And that is why we have launched the Environment and Society Lecture Series, to bring some of the world's most influential environmental thinkers and doers to our university to speak on environmental topics of great social import, to serve as a catalyst to inspire and engage students and faculty from all areas of not only the sciences but the arts and humanities, toward a common goal of forging a more sustainable future for everyone. Previous speakers have included former Vice President Al Gore, energy and visionary Amory Lovins, and author and environmental luminary Lester Brown. Today, we are honored to have the opportunity to listen and learn from an influential environmental leader, EPA Administrator Lisa Jackson. The Administrator visits us today at one of the most pivotal periods in our nation's environmental history. Last year, the EPA celebrated its 40th anniversary, and those 40 years have brought an extraordinary record of achievement and progress. EPA has overseen an unprecedented restoration of our environment, our land, indeed a reaffirmation of our American legacy from sea to shining sea. Anyone who questions the value that EPA has brought to the nation should spend a week or two in China or India. I was amazed to read in the papers this morning that Beijing Airport and some of the major highways in China were closed on Sunday and Monday because of poor visibility. Poor visibility caused by air pollution. That is not the America that we all want. And yet there are those who would block the EPA, would roll back regulations, and even do away with EPA. What is the answer? I'll leave it to others to figure out what the short-term response should be. Over the long term, I believe that just as the environment permeates all facets of our lives, all our institutions need to be infiltrated, and I use that word advisedly, infiltrated with people who understand the essential role the environment plays in our collective well-being. Who are the people who will serve as infiltrators, the future environmental leaders? Many of them are right here with us today. They are the students of the Nicholas School, and hi, you guys. The students of the larger Duke University, and the students from all over the world joining us today. And what better way to prepare our future leaders for future challenges than to have them learn from one of the most important environmental leaders of our time? To introduce our distinguished lecturer, I've asked Dr. Richard Newell, the Gendel Associate Professor of Energy and Environmental Economics, to introduce Administrator Jackson. Richard got his PhD from Harvard University in 1997, spent 9 years at the Resources for the Future, and was senior economist for energy and environment on the President's Council of Economic Advisors. He joined the faculty at Duke in 2007. He also spent a 2-year stint in Washington, D.C. as the administrator of the Environmental Information Administration. And I think when the dust settles, the record will show that Richard's tenure at EIA was a time of significant innovation and progress. We were fortunate that Richard decided to return to Duke last summer, and we're equally fortunate that he has agreed to direct the Duke's new energy initiative. Please welcome the Gendel Professor, Richard Newell.
Thank you, Dean Chamides, for that very kind introduction, and thanks to you and the Nicholas School for making this extraordinary learning opportunity available to the entire Duke community. People have asked me, since I returned to Duke from serving as the head of the U.S. Energy Information Administration, whether I miss Washington. I'm happy to say that one of the great pleasures I had in that role was introducing Lisa Jackson at the annual EIA Energy Conference this past spring, and I'm even more thrilled to do that here now that I'm back. So we're quite honored to welcome Lisa Jackson, Administrator of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, to Duke. Since being named to the cabinet by President Obama, Administrator Jackson has been cited as one of Newsweek's most important people, Time Magazine's most influential people in the world, and tonight she'll be honored as Energy Policymaker of the Year by Politico. This shows not only Lisa Jackson's significance, but the significance of the connection between energy and the environment, something that we're paying close attention to at Duke in our new energy initiative. If you're interested in learning more about that, energy.duke.edu. A scientist in her own right, Lisa Jackson heads a staff of more than 18,000 professionals who are ushering in a clean energy economy, addressing health threats from pollution in our air, water, and land, and renewing the public trust in EPA's work. Lisa Jackson was raised in New Orleans, where her roots run deep. She's a graduate of Tulane University and earned a master's degree in chemical engineering from Princeton. She started with EPA as a staff scientist in 1987 and served in leadership roles at environmental agencies in New York and New Jersey before coming to Washington, D.C. As head of the EPA, Administrator Jackson's priorities include taking action on climate change, improving air quality, protecting America's waters, and working for environmental justice. As the first African American to serve as the EPA administrator, she's also expanding outreach to communities that are historically underrepresented in environmental action. I'm sure she'll touch on some of those priorities today. As I mentioned, Ms. Jackson's New Orleans roots remain strong, as do her memories of Hurricane Katrina, from which she helped evacuate her mother. She's also taken a leadership role in the nation's response to the Deepwater Horizon oil spill and was recently appointed by President Obama to lead the Gulf Coast Ecosystem Restoration Task Force. This is a timely opportunity to get to hear from Lisa Jackson as the EPA faces both regulatory and budget challenges on multiple fronts. On behalf of the Duke community, I'm therefore very pleased to welcome Lisa Jackson, who will share her perspective on current EPA policies and recent congressional challenges to environmental laws. After she speaks, Dean Shimides will moderate a question and answer session. One last thing, at lunch, Administrator Jackson spoke sincerely about the importance of public service to a number of students who were at lunch. And before I turn it over to her, I want to just thank Lisa Jackson personally for her public service. So ladies and gentlemen, Lisa Jackson.
Thanks. It's the lunch crew right here in the house. Well, thank you very much. This is very impressive. I feel like I should perform. And I hope you'll think the performance is worthy of the space and worthy of this great institution. Let me begin by thanking Duke University. I had a chance to meet with your wonderful president. He is an amazing inspiration. He gave me inspiration just in the few minutes we were able to spend together. So I'm very grateful for that. And then you have Dean Bill Shimides here at the Nicholas School of the Environment and I guess Energy, or however you're calling yourselves this day. They're the same thing, two sides of the same coin. But I hope you realize I was looking at some of the work that the students I had the privilege of meeting with at lunch are doing, and I saw in it the mark of someone who understands how environmental policy, environmental science and study and economics hit the ground, because I saw pragmatic applications and questions being asked that could be used by policymakers very soon, and I'm sure that's a mark of his leadership and one that will serve you well, so congrats. And to Richard Newell, my former colleague, slightly jealous though I am, directing the Duke Energy Initiative is extremely important, and the Energy Information Administration was no less important. He was a wonderful colleague, but also provided facts and figures. We're going to talk a lot about facts and figures today, I bet, in Q&A, that are essential reading to understand what's really happening with the energy policy picture in this country. And to the Duke Sustainability Group for the work that you do. I hope some of you are here today. I saw evidence of it around your absolutely beautiful campus. And where is Gwen Keys-Fleming? You know, I'm a big believer in practical knowledge that you need. Stand up, Gwen, and look at them. She gives internships. I'm just saying. Okay, where is EPA Region 4? You don't know. Region 4 is in Atlanta. It's not as far as DC. You know, be that entrepreneurial student and mob her out. Speech. All right, so thank you for being here with me today. I love the format. I love that we're going to be pretty informal because this isn't some august lecture about the latest research, but it is no less important. Today I want to talk to you, but I really want to talk with you when we get to the conversation part of things about an idea that I believe is really a foundational part of the environmental movement. And it's also an idea that's taken on renewed importance in this year, in 2011. It's the idea that environmental and health threats are unambiguously nonpartisan concerns. I was actually on Rachel Maddow a couple of weeks ago, and I liked her phrasing even better. I said bipartisan, then I moved to nonpartisan, and she said above partisanship, which I thought was an even better way to think about the environment and human health and the threats to them both. You see, the quality of our air and our water has an effect on our way of life, whether we live in a red state or a blue state. And people of all backgrounds and parties and opinions want swift action whenever they see a threat in their local community. The environmental movement itself got started when it became clear that the forces of our private sector markets were not going to be enough to stop Los Angeles from becoming the smog capital of the world, or prevent situations like the Santa Barbara oil spill, or burning pollution on the Cuyahoga River in Ohio. Back then, American people from all walks of life stood up to demand a new mechanism for preventing pollution. They didn't do it because pollution was something far away. They did it because it was right there in their faces, sometimes in their noses, in front of their eyes. The EPA was created. And a suite of environmental laws was passed so that government could then begin to attack those problems, to set and enforce standards. That was a bipartisan effort. The EPA was created by Richard Nixon. Most people know he was a Republican. Its first administrator was a Republican, Bill Ruckelshaus, and many of the great advances that have happened over the years have happened with bipartisan support. Now, I came into this job, my current job at EPA, in 2009. And my ambition was then, in the face of a new generation of environmental challenges, to facilitate advances of the kind that we saw in the 1970s. 1970 was boomtown for addressing this country's environmental challenges. EPA was new, but the laws that we enforce were also new. And I thought that we would also strive to do that, to make those kind of breakthroughs with the same kind of bipartisan support. I'm really proud to be part of an EPA that has mobilized science and the law to create modern and innovative protections for the health of the American people. I'm also proud to be working for a president who has said that we can't wait on these issues. We came into office during a historic economic crisis. It certainly would have been easy to tell me and the EPA to sit and wait. But President Obama knows and has said that the choice between our economy being healthy and our environment being healthy is a false choice. And he directed us to hit the ground running in doing our jobs. One of our first steps was to resume work on the endangerment finding on greenhouse gases. If you work or care about greenhouse gas, climate pollution, and our changing climate, you know that this is the first administration to officially recognize through the endangerment finding that greenhouse gases pose a threat to our health and welfare. That's a legal term. It means that we are then obligated to take action under the Clean Air Act to address that threat. We've also taken long overdue steps to limit mercury, acid gases, arsenic, and other air toxics from power plants. We put standards in place to prevent pollution generated in one state from crossing state lines and causing health problems in another state. That cross-state air pollution rule is particularly important in a place like North Carolina, which sits downwind of its neighbors. Along with all of that work, we've also invested in water infrastructure and community cleanups. We've taken steps to support innovative products like biofuels and cutting-edge water protection technology. And we took swift steps to institute fuel economy standards that save drivers money and cut carbon pollution. That last example is a perfect case of how actions to protect our environment can also be really good for our economy. President Obama called those new fuel economy standards the single most important step we've ever taken as a nation to reduce our dependence on foreign oil. They are expected to save our nation's drivers more than $1.7 trillion, that's with a T, trillion dollars, at the gas pump over the lifetime of the vehicles that will be produced under those standards. And vehicles meeting the standards will save the average American family up to $6,600 by 2025. You see, setting clear long-term standards to address pollution or anything in this country has given clarity to the American industry, in this case to the American auto industry. That industry can now invest. It can invest in innovations and workers to build the most fuel-efficient vehicles in our nation's history. Last year, both Chrysler and General Motors separately announced plans to hire 1,000 workers each, mainly technicians and engineers, to develop fuel-efficient vehicles. And to build new innovative cars, you need materials and components and other cutting-edge technology. When President Obama made an announcement about fuel economy standards earlier this year, he talked about the growth of innovative American companies like Celgard here in North Carolina, an advanced battery company that hired 200 employees and is adding 250 more. More recently, there was news that Alcoa will be investing $300 million in an aluminum rolling facility in Davenport, Iowa, so that they can be ready to meet what they anticipate is more demand for their aluminum from the U.S. auto industry. That investment's going to create 150 new jobs. Now, unfortunately, and this is what I really want to talk to you about today, many of these advances, including the Clean Cars program and our fundamental environmental protections, are under threat right now. Since the beginning of this year, Republican leadership in the House of Representatives, now remember I said we should be nonpartisan, but this is a statement of fact, has orchestrated, gotta call them like you see them, 170 votes against environmental protection. That's almost a vote for every day the chamber has been in session, and those votes are to undermine EPA and our nation's environmental laws. Now, maybe the most frustrating part of that is that much of that has happened in response to myths or misleading information. One example, an assertion made by lobbying and industry groups that EPA is putting forward a train wreck of regulations that will hobble our economy. That claim has been repeated over and over in major news outlets and on the floor of Congress. In fact, one of the bills restricting the Clean Air Act was named the Train Act. The claim is founded on an American Legislative Executive Council report that details regulations that EPA supposedly did. One problem, we never actually proposed all those regulations. You might have heard another claim that was put forward, that EPA intends to triple its budget and add 230,000 new regulators. We have 17,000 or so now, to cut greenhouse gas emissions. And where we're going to start would be backyard barbecue grills, heresy here in North Carolina, I might add, and sources like cows. In truth, we put forth a tailoring rule, now years ago, a common sense plan to tailor our greenhouse gas standards to exempt small sources. It actually was considered deregulatory when we did it. Small sources like local businesses who certainly meet the thresholds in the Clean Air Act, but aren't the main drivers of carbon pollution in our economy. A massive expansion of our staff was never a possibility. The people who cited the 230,000 new EPA employees knew it. That number came from EPA's documents that explained with the Department of Justice why the tailoring rule was necessary. We needed it so we wouldn't have to hire new employees. We needed it to deregulate. Now, there's something else going on in Washington, and we have to talk about that as well. To be fair, there's not a lot of help going on for those who want to get real information out there. Some of you might have seen not long ago a Wall Street Journal op-ed. It was written, interestingly enough, by a longtime climate denier or skeptic who performed a comprehensive study on the data that he had been casting doubt on for a long time. After years of denial and skepticism, and he looked at the data, and his conclusion was, and I quote, global warming is real. Now, what's interesting about his op-ed, and I've seen him on TV now since, remember the ClimateGate scandal, which was over emails from a handful of researchers, was front page news in popular media, on TV. Contrast to that, his admission, his conversion, maybe, of a key climate denier and the affirmation of science got most of its attention from a segment on The Daily Show. Nothing wrong with The Daily Show. But just striking how hard it is to get information to the American people that isn't inflammatory or misleading, or maybe scary. So you begin to see why, I think, we're seeing an unprecedented effort to roll back the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and our nation's waste disposal laws. To see ironic things like why less than 3 years after a coal ash spill that covered 300 acres of a Tennessee county, the House majority passed legislation to prevent EPA from regulating coal ash. Or you can see why less than 2 years after the Deepwater Horizon spill, the best industry groups can come up with to create jobs is to deregulate oil drilling. Or you can see how, after the second hottest summer on record, followed by the foot of snow we got in late October, followed by the reversal of a leading climate skeptic, people are still working hard to stop EPA from taking steps to cut carbon pollution. I've coined a term. We all remember too big to fail. Well, this pseudo-jobs plan to protect polluters might well be called too dirty to fail. How we respond to these attacks, to these efforts, will literally mean the difference between sickness and in health. In some cases, life and death for hundreds of thousands of people in this country. That's not hyperbole. Mercury is a neurotoxin that affects brain development in unborn children and young people. Lead has similar effects. Nitrogen oxides and volatile organic compounds contribute to ozone alert days, those days when seniors and asthmatics and people with respiratory problems are at serious risk if they do nothing more than step outside and breathe the air. Too dirty to fail puts our nation into what the president calls a race to the bottom, a race for the weakest health protections and the most loopholes in our environmental policies. For those of you born after 1970, it would be the first time in your lives that the health and environmental protections that you grew up under, that you probably took for granted, are not steadily improved, but rather deliberately taken away or weakened. Without doubt, the result will be more asthma attacks, more respiratory illness, and more premature deaths. What there won't be is any clear path to new job development. EPA has been around about 41 years. We've seen 200% growth in our GDP over the years of EPA's existence. After all that time and all that growth, it's clear that we can have an EPA that does its job to ensure a clean environment and a growing economy. Not one credible economist links our current economic crisis or any economic crisis to clean air or clean water standards. Last month, a story in the Washington Post quoted economists who said that the effect of government regulations on jobs is minimal. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, data collected from business executives shows that only 0.3% of layoffs in 2010 were because of government regulations or intervention. That story even quoted the chief executive of the American Electric Power Company, one of the largest coal-based utilities in the nation, saying that when regulations require pollution control, they require technology. When regulations like the EPA cross-state air pollution rule or the mercury rule I spoke about earlier come into effect, then utilities have to do something, without question. They have to hire plumbers and electricians and engineers and fabricators. His words were, jobs are created in that process. No question about that. As for the notion that eliminating environmental regulation equals a plan for job creation, a former economist from the Reagan White House recently said of that idea, and I quote, "It's just nonsense. It's just made up." A strategy to grow our economy by doing less is not sufficient to the challenges we face now. The president has directed federal agencies to review regulations to eliminate unnecessary burdens for business and ensure that vital health protections remain intact. I think that's a good thing. But that is not the beginning and end of our plan. The president also sent the American Jobs Act to Congress. He proposed investments in first responders and teachers to create and keep jobs. The bill contains the idea of an infrastructure bank that would put $10 billion into smart transportation and energy and water infrastructure to create jobs. Now, we also know that smart regulations can lead to new jobs. As the CEO of AEP indicated in the Washington Post, we can put Americans to work, retrofitting outdated, dirty plants with updated pollution control technology. Let me be more specific. In the next few days, we will finalize the proposed mercury and air toxic standards to reduce power plant emissions. Let's break down the numbers. Thanks, I just left the EPA office in RTP where they're doing all the work, so I'll take that on their behalf. There are about 1,100 coal-fired units across the country, 1,100. More than 40% of that 1,100 do not use pollution controls to limit their emissions. It's the year 2011, almost 2012. To build, that means the other 60%, by the way, do, so it's doable, it can be done. To build, install, operate, and maintain the pollution controls needed at that 40% under EPA's coming standards, we estimated the creation of 31,000 short-term construction jobs. That's net positive. And 9,000 long-term jobs, utility worker jobs. Those jobs come with something much more important. It's the reason for our existence. It's the reason for the Clean Air Act. Clean air means health benefits. Those health benefits are estimated to be as high as $140 billion per year starting in 2016, the year that the standards come into effect, with significant reductions in harmful emissions that, as the rule was proposed, would prevent, get these numbers, up to 17,000 premature deaths each year, up to 11,000 heart attacks each year, up to 120,000 cases of childhood asthma symptoms each year, 11,000 cases of acute bronchitis among children each year, and 12,200 emergency room visits and hospital admissions each year. When I hear those numbers, when I think about, those numbers are dwarfed, by the way, by the cross-state air pollution rules, which are now final, which were subject to one of those 170 votes, and a vote, by the way, that we won in the US Senate. I know that right now there are two visions competing for the future of our environment and our economy. And looking at this crowd, I know that's your future. One says that we can rely on science. We can rely on our extraordinary suite of environmental laws. We can count on innovation to protect health and environment and grow a clean, sustainable economy. But the alternative says that moving forward requires rolling back. And in this case, near and dear to my heart, standards that protect our air, our water, and our land. It says we have to increase protection for big polluters while reducing safeguards for the rest of us to maintain a tenuous hold on some small number of jobs, in the face of data that shows we can grow more jobs if we put those standards into place. There's been 41 years of progress. The American people still believe in vision number one. A majority of Americans, in poll after poll, believe the economic and health benefits of clean air rules outweigh their costs. More than half of Republican voters recently said they oppose a congressional proposal to stop the EPA from enacting new limits on air pollution from power plants. More than 3/4 of Americans support new EPA standards for mercury and air toxics. One of the reasons I'm here is that students, educators, and young people have always been central to the environment of this country. These days, we need you once again to know what's going on, to answer those who claim that our success, that your future jobs are served by eliminating health protections and turning our future over to continuing to operate dirty power plants. I just feel like it's time for us to have a real conversation about what it means when you politicize an issue that should be above partisan politics. I believe it's time to call too dirty to fail what it is and challenge those who put it forward as a job creation plan. We're going to need to count on you. We're going to need for you and people who are being trained by incredible universities like this one to be part of the effort. And as the mother of two sons who are going to be heading to some incredible university, they might not be as smart as all of you, but I think they are. I need you to know how important the decisions, this moment is in terms of what you'll be doing and whether this country will be leading the world in the trillions of dollars to be spent and made in a clean energy economy. With that, let's have some questions and answers. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Minister Jackson. Am I on? Yes, that's good. I got you to laugh, too. That's good, too. So, great remarks. We've got some questions for you, and we've gone to all corners of the earth to find them. And the first question we have from all corners of the earth is from Tim Profeta, the director of the Nicholas Institute of Environmental Policy Solutions. And it's not very surprising that his is about climate. So he writes, one of the greatest challenges of our generation is addressing global warming. And for years, we have seemed to be on a political course to adopt a program in this country that will reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And while there are things that we can do under the Clean Air Act in the states, most would acknowledge that a full national solution to climate change requires political action through legislation. Such legislation doesn't seem all that likely. So how can we regain the political will to act on the issue once again? And how can an institution like Duke help us to get there?
I don't know where Tim is, but hi, Tim. Yeah, absolutely. The current legislative landscape would not appear to lend itself to an economy-wide program to price carbon or deal with carbon. That is unfortunate because we were talking, EPA's regulations are put in place to protect public health. So when we regulate, and we're scheduled to put forth proposed regulations to limit greenhouse gas emissions from power plant early next year. When we regulate, we certainly do some good. But where we really see change that happens quicker and better than we thought is when the economy gets involved in superseding regulation because there's money to be made on the other side. That's the lost opportunity of not having legislation. And it is not an outcome that we can get under the Clean Air Act as currently written. You can make progress under the Clean Air Act, without doubt, and we absolutely should. The new car standards I talked about were under the Clean Air Act. The new utility standards will be under the Clean Air Act, but we simply won't be able to touch parts of the economy in the way that the incentive of a price of some type on carbon would have given. But there is hope. The hope is what I see everywhere I go. If you get outside of Washington, actually inside Washington too, I don't know if any of you are from the District of Columbia, but they have a sustainable energy utility in DC. They actually have a utility whose job it is to come to your house and act like a utility, except what they do is make your house more energy efficient. Really cool stuff. There are cool things like that happening in communities all across our country. Red state communities, blue state communities, purple state communities, because the opportunity in addressing efficiency with getting what we all know by every study is low-hanging fruit, free if you can make an investment, energy efficiency is, at the residential level, at the commercial level, at the industrial level is still there. And the economics isn't changing. If anything, it's getting better. And so with the money that is still continuing to hit the streets through the energy efficiency block grants, that was part of the Recovery Act, we are seeing communities do amazing things, dealing with their top energy uses, anything from their public buildings to their traffic lights and lighting, more their lighting systems, all the way to demand response solutions with hardworking public utility commissioners, and there are lots of them out there. So I think the most important thing over the next years is to continue that which is also great in this country, which is community level action, which will eventually require our policymakers at the federal level to respond. And I actually am one of those people who believes that this pendulum swing will be shorter rather than longer. That could just be because it keeps me sane to believe that. And what EPA can do is to do its job, to use the Clean Air Act. We were actually mandated to. Once you make an endangerment finding, EPA must act. But we have to use the Clean Air Act in smart, sensible ways to make progress that it's more than no regret strategies. It should move us forward, but it shouldn't be made in such a way that it harms our economy or that we can't be cost beneficial, and I think we can do that.
Okay, so as a follow-up to that, there are some folks hanging out in South Africa these days at the COP meeting. In fact, we even have some students out there. What is the administration's hope for the COP meeting?
That's a good question. I think that obviously we're 2 COPs away from Copenhagen now, and where the president personally attended, and then Cancun, where we continue to make formal progress towards a suite of solutions. Again, not no regrets, but this idea that we would put together pieces of a puzzle. I think the administration is still very much committed to the idea that there needs to be commitments that are verifiable, that we need to be investing in that verification process, that we intend to honor commitments made to help fund solutions in the developing world. Whether or not we're going to see a significant breakthrough in the next week as the Durban COP winds up, I do not know, and I would be wrong to speculate.
Okay. The next question, we're going to change topics a little bit, is from Dean Najokes, Yadkin Riverkeeper. The 40th anniversary of the Clean Water Act, is 2012. What does the EPA intend to do to protect the act from congressional attacks, it's interesting up here, and dirty water riders that threaten fishable, swimmable, and drinkable water? It's kind of a loaded question. But.
Yeah. Fight. We have to get everybody thinking about it. The #1 environmental issue for most Americans is clean water. It's because water is such a unifier, because people understand what happens in their community if they lose the advantage that is clean water. I read somewhere, do not quote this number, If you're a blogger, don't look it up and tell me I was wrong. So I will verify it. But something like China has 22% of the world's population, 6% of its water. And then if you take away that percentage of the water that is contaminated, you see the strategic challenges that China is facing. We are blessed in exactly the opposite. We have a huge strategic advantage in terms of freshwater resources in the country, marine resources as well. You just heard me speaking about the Gulf of Mexico, or you heard in my introduction that I'm doing a lot of work on the Gulf. So I don't mean to minimize oceans and marine work, but I think we will see in the near future, for those of you working on water technology, that strategic advantage will play out in decisions made on manufacturing. If you have water that's too dirty for drinking water use, that's one thing. If you have water, as is true in some parts of the developing world, that's too dirty for manufacturing, it doesn't matter how cheap the labor costs are. That is an advantage that we should be pressing in this country. So I think when the Clean Water or Dirty Water Act vote came, we did have one of the rare times where we had, I think, a few folks who crossed party lines to vote against it. I think that's right. And I think that's a reflection on how important water is in our communities. The number one threat, in my opinion, to our water today is not what comes out of a pipe, although that's not entirely under control, but what happens when it rains, when the water runs across our parking lots and our ag lands and our city streets and our suburban lawns, and picks up dirt that happens to have a lot of pollution attached to it. And I'm still hopeful that we find solutions to that issue, but that is a program that is much less adaptable to a regulatory solution than to community partnerships. And I know Nicholas is doing some great work on that. That, I think, is going to be, if it's the number one issue for American people and people in their communities care about it, it seems like there's the energy there to come around to community solutions. And I would strongly urge you to continue to be a leader there, because I think the breakthrough is going to be a series of regional breakthroughs on clean water.
Okay, so we have a couple of questions here related to sort of like the EPA budget. The first one from Katie Donaher de Cardenas. How will the reductions of EPA workers, and specifically those who monitor contaminated wells in this case, affect public safety and our awareness of contamination, for example, as the process of fracking moves forward? I fear that any reduction in legislation or monitoring could prevent drillers from being responsible in storing fracking wastewater.
Thanks. I'm gonna actually broaden the question a bit. I think one of the biggest threats to our environmental health, the health of our environment, and therefore our clean water and clean air, are the huge numbers of cuts we're seeing across the country at the state level, in state environmental, in investments in state environmental resources. States write something like 90% of the permits. They do something like, they would say 90% of the enforcement. It might be a little bit different. Depends on if you're looking at dollar value versus number of cases. It is fine to have epic battles over what the mercury and air toxic standards should say, but then not have one single qualified person in the state who can write the permit to ensure that it gets implemented would be a huge problem. And I think that's happening largely silently, or it's somewhat diluted because it's happening in different places, and it's extremely important that at the State House level there's support. Traditionally, the work at EPA, it's really fun to head the agency, but the work, the day-to-day work happens with professionals between EPA and state, sometimes county or local health officials as well. And so when you talk about EPA losing resources, but you compound that with states who don't have it, can't pick up the slack, what you start to see is EPA fighting with states who I think are well motivated at the career level to say, thanks, we'd love to, but we can't take on one more single thing because our numbers are down 30, 40, 50%. And that is public, it's like 30% less doctors in some ways. Those are public health professionals. They do everything from ensure that drinking water wells are monitored to groundwater pollution wells to issuing and inspecting facilities. There is one other thing I want to say on monitoring, though. This could be your next question, which is I also think monitoring provides one of those breakthrough moments for environmental protection. Monitoring technology is getting a lot cheaper and a lot more local. My new example is, you know how you all go to the grocery store and you check yourself out? How many of you are getting the check yourself out line? Why? I don't know, because we're paying for somebody to check us out, but somehow it just feels like we're in control of our fate and destiny to watch those little things go across. Makes a nice noise, ding, 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 you feel good, talks to you. I don't know why. I know my kids, that's all they do. But so I think there's a message in there which is not that deep, which is that community-based monitoring, where communities do it, understand it, is much more available, and EPA can help by looking at our regulations and requiring more fence line monitoring. You can tell a community all day till you're blue in the face, we've modeled this plume and you're just fine, but then you can give their daughter a little backpack to walk up and down the street and see what's in their airspace, and you can know for sure. And you've created a little environmentalist over here who's concerned about public health. Maybe you've built in a little bit of STEM education all at the same time. And that same idea should be going all the way up through our professionals. Not all monitoring is going to be done by a child, and I don't, no. Above partisanship. But I do think that we need to have the same thought about professionals. So if you're a postdoc, thinking about monitoring that happens in a community that empowers a community to speak for itself, especially communities of color. I said at lunch that the future of the movement on the environment is educating the American people that we are not done. Yes, the air is cleaner. Yes, the water is cleaner, but we face significant threats. Toxic chemicals that we don't have the resources or the laws to assess. Cleanup of contaminated sites. 8% of our population that still drinks water that doesn't meet federal standards. The land along our borders, the land that tribal land, all these challenges. We need to educate folks who think we're done. But we also need to make sure we are reaching out to diverse communities, because as the demographics in our country change, we cannot afford to have people think that the environment is someone else's issue. It is not a spectator sport.
Okay. I'm going to skip to a question that's come over the internet to us from Sandra Diaz, who's the campaign coordinator for Appalachian Voices. And it is maybe a tough question for you. Almost 3 years after the almost 3 years after the TVA coal ash spill in our neighboring state, Tennessee, you said that EPA was committed to protecting the American people from this toxic substance. North Carolina has a dozen high-hazard coal ash dams, and almost all are leaking heavy metals. When is the EPA planning on putting out some minimum federal standards, and what do you think they will look like?
So the EPA did a proposal that does have minimal federal standards. Coal ash right now is exempt from federal regulation, I believe under the Bevel Amendment to the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. Say that quickly 3 times. And EPA proposed for the first time, I think ever, to remove that exemption and regulate coal ash either as a solid waste. Our solid waste laws are pretty good in this country. Obviously, you want to make sure adequate monitoring is going on, or as a hazardous waste. And there has been significant pushback from those who use coal ash as a they beneficially reuse it, that if you call it a hazardous waste, that will stigmatize it such that this potential feedstock now, no one will want it. It's used in wallboard, it's used in products, it's sometimes used in cement-type products. So EPA has had to do several things, and there was significant political pushback. I think it's fair to say that if not a majority, close to a majority of states said, please let us handle it. And that, by the way, is what was happening when the Tennessee spill happened. EPA did respond to the Tennessee spill by, in addition to looking at regulation, doing an assessment of impoundments across the country. And we found very few that we thought hadn't been monitored in a long time. But we did have significant follow-up work, and we've primarily done that with the states, who once they know we found a problem are quick, thank goodness, to step in and address it through. States have varying ways that they handle coal ash, and the regs go from stringent to not quite so stringent. So we are sometime in 2012, I think it's going to be towards the end of the year, but several things will happen in 2012. We have been doing a risk analysis of the beneficially reused material. We had no data. We've been allowing people to beneficially reuse this material, but there was no scientific study to show what the risk of that was. One would think it's not very high, but EPA shouldn't be making those kinds of judgments without information. Our own Inspector General actually noted that recently in a report. So we should have the results of a risk analysis of certain beneficial uses. That should help to clarify whether or not there's any concern there. And then later in the year, I think we will finalize regulations. I should note that one of those 170 votes was to take away EPA's authority to regulate coal ash. So politics is not, we are not immune to politics there.
Good. This question comes from Wendy Graber of the Nicholas School. It's a real short one. What's up with that Keystone pipeline thing? It's
in, I guess, a bit of stasis right now. When the State Department announced that they were going to do a supplemental environmental impact study, I guess that was about a month ago now, that sort of stopped the process. They had already done 2 rounds of comment on environmental impact studies. They had done an impact study, done a supplemental. We're out with, I think, a final. And then basically said we're going to stop and look at least one issue, which is the route of the line through the Sandhills region of Nebraska. And I believe we've, at the staff level, met with State Department staff to begin to scope what that reanalysis will look like. And if you know anything about how environmental impact statements happen, that's under the National Environmental Policy Act. EPA has a special review role under NEPA, had reviewed the first 2 EISs and outlined some significant concerns. And obviously, as they move through the process over, I think they said the next 15 months, EPA will be doing its job and reviewing new documents as well. And I should note that I think today, in the House of Representatives, there's some attempt to tie approval of the Keystone Pipeline, I think this year, or that's probably not right. I think it was to asked the president to move past environmental impacts and make a national interest determination on the line sometime this year. So thus, basically wiping away the State Department's determination that they weren't ready to get to that process. So that could be vote 172 or 3. They're tying it to the payroll tax reduction because everybody knows that pipelines and payroll taxes are perfect together.
Well, the pipeline brings the money to the people. But so this question comes from Harvey Richmond, who is retired from the U.S. EPA. And let me add a little bit of
Happily retired?
It doesn't say. It doesn't say. You have to tell from the question. So let me just, as a background, I know that there are certain NGOs in the world that pride themselves on a motto that says, "Sue the bastards." And occasionally, I don't want to say the bastards, but occasionally the EPA is the one that gets sued. So the question is, how will EPA defend the current ozone standard in court after you and EPA have said that the 0.07 standard
show we got through, 6 questions before ozone
is inadequate to protect public health and welfare?
Let the record also show that an EPA employee brought it up. That's why I love the EPA, because on the case, protecting the American people, science and the law. Well, several things. So the ozone standards are reviewed, at least by law, they're supposed to be reviewed every 5 years. In making the determination to wait until 2013 for the next review, the president looked at the very real fact, and I was talking to folks in RTP about this earlier. Sorry, my voice is slowly going, that's why I have the tea. That the new science on ozone is going to start to be out there in the public domain as early as next year, 2012. So we'll start to see the first scientific assessments on ozone out there, and in the meantime, EPA has to implement the current standard, which is 75 parts per billion, adopted in 2007 or 8. We are going to proceed with designations. Not long ago, we sent a memo out to the regions and the states What happens is once the standard is set, states then nominate themselves, and they nominate which areas of the state are going to be designated as in attainment with the standard and in non-attainment with the standard. That process is going to continue as well. And it's certainly no secret that at the same time we'll be looking at a standard that's likely to change again in 2013. Or that's possible, I shouldn't say likely. But that could change again in 2013. But we are moving forward in the designation process as we must. I should also add on ozone that there's several things that have happened in this administration that are going to have a huge impact on air pollution, ozone, soot in particular, cleaner cars, huge impact on smog pollution, the mercury and air, the cross-state air pollution rule, the one that talks about upwind states and downwind states. Much of the benefit comes from finally ensuring that a state that is really powerless to do anything except try to sue EPA to stop upwind pollution actually starts with a pretty level slate. You know, we'll try, the purpose of that rule is to erase the upwind contribution to air pollution, say here in North Carolina, and it's probably significant. In New Jersey, where I was the environmental commissioner before the honor of being EPA administrator, about a third of our air pollution was from upwind. So that third, we'd never be able to do anything, and if you ever look at the non-attainment map for New Jersey, it's pretty much all in non-attainment. We also have a car issue, very densely populated state, and we have some sources as well, so we're not without work to do. But there will be huge amounts of progress. The way the Clean Air Act works, it's actually, you know, sort of like the Constitution and the elegance of it. It sets health-based standards. It sets the goal. How do you know what clean air is if you don't define it? And in our case, we do that quantitatively. But the actual reductions come in the standard setting that happens under other parts of the Clean Air Act, either the toxic standards under 112 or the conventional air pollution standards. And those we've made tremendous progress on. And many of the areas that might otherwise be in non-attainment are going to come into attainment on the 75, we think, based on doing nothing other than letting the EPA standards stay in place. Another reason it's so important not to overturn those standards.
Very good. So time flies. I wonder if you'd like to take a minute or two, if you have any final thoughts for us, and then we have something for you.
Wow, time does fly. I don't know. I wish we had more time, because I cannot explain how important it is to not be entirely secluded in the wonder that is this institution and the learning that's going on, because we know that environmental protection drives, not because we set out to do it, bloggers, but because it happens, drives investment decisions. It has to. The environmental regulations and standards that are set become guideposts along the road in the private sector. And whenever I talk to folks who are trying to decide where they're going to be working and what they're going to be working on, I know that one of the important things we do is set at least the floor, the guidepost of clean energy. The President's commitment to clean energy has been unwavering, and there are many opportunities. Most of them, I think, have been joined now in pretty public discussion to help send signals through the regulatory process about the importance of continuing to innovate, to reduce emissions, but ensure our country's energy future. It also happens to be incredibly popular from a major perspective and from a where people want to be working. And that's because we know that that's where the world economy is going. So I wish you all the best. I think that if we do our jobs right, we will keep moving forward. We will not always move forward as quickly as we might even have thought we would, but we're not moving backwards either. And I think that's a testament to the fundamental sort of place where most Americans sit, which is on the side of common sense standard setting that keeps them and their family safe and healthy, but that gives industry a reasonable amount of time to comply, so there are no surprises. The rules we talked about today, 3 years to comply, you get a 4th year if your permit writer wants to give you one. We are not talking about change that's going to happen. You'll graduate before those rules are finally in effect in 2016. But you will measurably see the difference when you drive the roads in the mountains around here because of EPA's work. And you don't have to know that every day, but you need to know that that's sitting there sort of undergirding the future of our country when it comes to clean air, clean water, clean energy, sustainable win-win solutions for our economy and the environment. So I wish you all the very, very best and leave you in the wonderful, and I have to say a shout out to former Administrator Bill Riley, who I know is at the Institute.
That's right.
And I'm sure many of you have seen his courageous moves lately to talk about the importance of the Clean Air Act to his former colleagues and the Clean Water Act. So I have to say in absentia hi to him.
Well, thank you so much. On behalf of the Nicholas School and Duke, I want to thank you for coming, and also thank you for all the wonderful work that you're doing and the courage to meet the challenges that no doubt you'll be facing in the coming years. We have, as a token of our appreciation, a gift for you. It's produced by a local artist, Marjorie Pearson. You can't look at it yet. Wait, you need to go off stage. Go ahead. We rehearsed this, I thought. Anyway, Marjorie is from New Orleans, like yourself, and she has spent much of her artistic career documenting through very, very moving photographs the beauty and wonder of the Gulf Coast and the wetlands and their loss. And I think the picture that we have for you is Cedar in the Winds. And our student, who's the co-director of the Student Council for the Nicholas School, is out here to present it to you. Can I join you? Thank you so much.
I think grab my tea. I'm not leaving my tea.
I got it. Thank you very much.